Hola a todos, soy Fede Carestía. Hoy vamos a hablar de una película que marcó un antes y un después en las vidas de Jennifer Aniston, de Brad Pitt y de Angelina Jolie. ¿Por qué? Porque vamos a hablar de Señor y Señora Smith. Pude conversar con Jeff Mann, el diseñador de producción de esta película de más o menos el 2006, que me contó cómo fue que la vida, cómo fue que el matrimonio entre Jennifer Aniston y Brad Pitt terminó influyendo en una película que después influyó en el matrimonio de ellos. Todo en este informe sobre Señor y Señora Smith.
We now return to Mira Akian and Contré with our latest interview.
So what Doug's motivation was that the house was kind of a metaphor for, his original thinking was that the house was a metaphor for their relationship.
So how's work?
We had a little trouble with the commission to house Atlanta.
What, are you looking for a job or something?
You are the job.
And he's like, you should come up to my house, Jeff, and check it out. Like me and Jen, our house, me and Jen up in Bel Air, right? Like, so I'm like, okay. And Doug, I'm like, what am I gonna say? Like, nah, I'm good. Like, it's cool. I'm like, okay, yeah, that'd be great. Like, so, and then everybody's like, when are you going to Brad's house? When are you going to Brad's house? Like, because we were, spending mad money building this still pretty substantial set on stage. So I go up to Brad's house. It was like to the nines, like French modernist, kind of, like antiques and, glossy piano, white walls, and just like to the absolute maximum of like the most sophisticated taste of the time that money could buy, basically. Yeah. You know what I mean? Very tasteful, very handsome, kind of minimalist. Every finish is within an inch of its life. Venetian plaster, perfectly smooth, finishes perfect, this, that, but interesting furniture, like all these very specific Jean-Michel Franck and all these other French modernist designers that are kind of like, like the like the Scandinavian modernists of France, in the 30s and 40s, like really avant-garde modern design stuff. And I'm like, okay, like I get it. I hear it loud and clear.
Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie.
You still alive, baby?
The house is the place where they pour all this resource and thought instead of into their relationship, because they can't communicate honestly. So they live in this place that is like a showcase of. One interesting thing about the design of the house, and of course it was all done strategically with this big finale fight in mind. And because we were doing finishes and doing things like this, that we had to pre-decide where the gunfight was going to take place. And so we built the house with all the fucking pyrotechnics in the walls, which is, you probably couldn't get away with today. None of them were armed. None of them were armed or wired or anything. But because there were so many squibs and bullet hits everywhere, that to say you could go back after the house was done and you're going to go, okay, we're not going to shoot, we're going to squib the house tomorrow, like it never would have happened, like, because there was so much. So we kind of had to forecast as much as possible within the design. This is the days before 3D models, and that was like the whole house was hand drawn, drafted, no computer used in the making of that house to try to figure out what that blocking was going to be based on the model and drawings and where and how many bullet hits and how many takes worth of bullet hits and all that kind of stuff was a bit of a mind bender. But then the house, everybody loved being in there, and the actors loved being in there, and it turned out, some of the gestures were really strong, design gestures in there. A lot of them were just out of my head.
Come to dad.
So in the kitchen, there was a painting hanging on the wall, and it's this giant carton of eggs that hangs in the kitchen, right? There's like a breakfast nook in the kitchen. That is a scan of a painting that I had bought at a thrift store, right? A long, long time ago. And of course there's legality and there's all these things to seeing that stuff. So I lied and said that I painted it in college because I wanted to use it in the movie. Now I found it in a fucking thrift store, right? So we scanned it and we printed it. You know, the original one's like this big. We printed it 5 feet square and it lives on the wall. And there's all this kind of like empty nest metaphor, eggs, kind of, you know, whatever. That was the, so fucking 10 years later, I get a random phone call one day from Fox Legal, 10 years after the movie was made. And they tell me that this woman had reached out to them and some friend of hers said, hey, have you ever seen this movie? I think that's your painting in the movie. And so she was suing Fox for like $10 million, some ridiculous amount of money. And so it turns out that she painted it when she was in like City College, right? Locally in a little town called Glendale. And she had it in a storage unit that she lost, and they cleaned out her storage unit. And that shit got sold off and it went into the ether and it ended up at this thrift store where I bought it probably a good 6 years before the movie was made, you know, that I had this painting. So they settled with her. I think they gave her 10 grand or 20 grand or something like that.
That's a good sell for her.
Is it? But nonetheless, like I totally got busted with like wanting to use this. Oh, and the other flip side of it was I had to send her back the original. Like I had to relinquish the painting.
Okay, but did Fox like punish you in any ways?
No, they, you know, I mean, I think that they were kind of, I don't, you know, they weren't, when they first told me the amount of money she was after, I kind of got a little, you know, like, you know, Jesus, you know, but they were kind of, we'll never be that, but nonetheless, and I bet you, in the scheme of things, the things that go to lawsuits at Fox, like the 10 grand or 20 grand is like, you know, coffee money for, you know, that doesn't mean I'm proud that I got a situation like that to happen, but it is a good story.